Yeah, especially since we have some new folks maybe accessing for the first time, maybe working out some kinks.
Yeah.
Oh, here's Carlos.
Hey, good evening,
Hey.
everyone.
Hello.
Hi, good evening. Okay, Roberta, you okay for us to launch here?
Go right ahead.
Okay, good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for joining. This is the Wednesday, January 22nd, 2025 meeting of the City of Somerville Community Preservation Committee. Pursuant to Chapter 2 of the Acts of 2023, this meeting of the Somerville Community Preservation Committee will be conducted by remote participation. We will have a video recording available upon request as soon as possible after the meeting. Roberta, could you please call the roll?
I will do that. Running through the list as it is on the agenda, Ryan,
Present.
Eric,
Here.
Carlos,
President,
Mary Jo. I don't see Mary Jo yet. John. I see John. He's maybe can't hear us, not responding. Maybe he's frozen, actually. I'm sure that John will be back in a moment. Joe,
Here.
Heather, also not here. Up, right on cue. Heather, I'm just calling the roll. Hi, Heather, I'm just calling the roll. You're here.
Yes, I am.
Michael
Here.
and David.
yes.
All right, and I just got a note from John saying that his computer crashed and he's logging back in.
Okay,
So.
great. Thank you very much. Okay, Roberta, do you want to welcome our new members here or introduce them to start us off?
Absolutely. So unfortunately, we are still missing one of our new members, but we can begin. Oh, here she is. Actually, Mary Jo, will give her a moment to get fully on board. Hello, Mary Jo.
A bit late. Getting in was not easy for some reason. Don't know why.
Well, that's no problem. We'll work it out next time.
Okay.
So we have just called the roll and are just about to begin a round of introductions. So welcome to the committee, to all of our new members. We have 3 new members starting this month. And we will, so when we have a new chair, new vice chair, so thank you to Ryan, who stepped in to serve as chair this year, and Eric, who is serving as the vice chair. I will invite Ryan to introduce yourself, and you can just say 1 or 2 sentences about maybe what part of the city you live in and what background or special interest brought you to serve on the CPC. If you are serving as a representative of another board or committee or group, you can mention that as well.
Excellent. Okay, thanks, Roberta. So, hi, everybody. My name is Ryan Kirchhoff. I am as Roberta mentioned, the new chair for 2025. I've been on the CPC for 2 years now, and my second year served as the vice chair. I am a general public member of the committee. I live in East Somerville. My background is in urban planning. I work as an affordable housing developer. And yeah, having lived in Somerville for 10 years now, was excited to get involved with the CPC as a way to be more involved in local decision making on projects that I think are really cool and that matter for the city. I'll hand to Eric next, please.
Hi, I'm Eric Parks. Let's see, I'm this Historic Commission representative to this commission. I'm the chair of the Historic Commission, which I've been on for close to 20 years now, I think. I'm an architect and among other things. And what else? Did I cover all the bases there? Seems like very brief. That's me.
Thanks. Why don't you pass it to David?
Yeah, hi, my name's David Turin. I am on the Somerville Conservation Commission for more years than I can count, and am currently serving as the representative from that organization on the CPC. I've lived in Somerville 25 years, 24 years, and I've been involved, actively involved in open space and in recreation issues and conservation commission stuff for many of those years.
Thank you. Michael.
Hi, everybody. My name is Michael. I am a representative from the planning board. I was just trying to quickly look up how long I've been on that board, a number of years now. So happy and excited to be here. I hope I can fill at least a tiny amount of what Jahan brought to this board. So I live in the Winter Hill neighborhood, and like Ryan, I'm very excited about many of the projects this committee gets to see, and happy to lend a hand wherever I can.
Thank you. We're going to skip Estella right now because Estella is not a board member. Estella is an invited guest this evening. So we will move on to Carlos.
Hello, everyone. My name's Carlos Ayala. I'm a lifelong resident here in Somerville, and I'm going to be representing the general public. And I'm excited to just get involved and learn a lot more about the work that we're doing here, and figure out how I can pitch in here and support.
Thanks, Carlos.
Thanks. Joe.
How you doing, guys? Sorry. Joe Capuano. I'm the SHA representative. Born and raised in Somerville. Like to be involved. Anything I can do to help, just let me know.
Thank you. Heather.
Hi, I'm Heather Highmark. I'm one of the general members on the committee. I'm a landscape architect. I practice here in the city, work mostly in the Northeast. So have an interest in preservation, open space, affordable housing. So it's a pleasure to be with you. I'm a Winter Hill resident.
Thank you. Mary Jo.
Yes, Mary Jo Bohart, and I am a Spring Hill neighborhood resident, which is in Ward 3. A background is in urban planning, primarily in municipal economic development, and I've looked forward to an opportunity to get involved in the community where I live after having worked for the city many years ago. So kind of coming full circle, and I've admired the work that you all have been doing, and it's wonderful to be a part of it.
Thank you. John.
John Browning-Cant. I am the Public Space and Urban Forestry representative for the CPC. I've been on the CPC for almost 2 years and working with the city for almost 2 years. And I am trying to become a landscape designer right now, working through my accreditation.
Thank you. And I think all of you know me. I have spoken with each of you individually at some point or another. So no need for introduction, but I do want to take a moment to call out Alan Inacio, who is always lurking in the background there. So you all know who Alan is.
Hi, Alan Inacio, Director of Finance Administration. Roberta runs the CPA program on my team, and we also do grants administration, HUD programs, and other compliance functions for OSPCD. Thank you all for participating in the committee. It's very much appreciated.
Thanks, Alan.
Thank you, Alan. And also, I just wanted to mention that Carlos has actually not had the chance to be sworn in yet. So although Carlos is our new committee member, he's going to be an attendee for the rest of this session and join us next month as a voting member. So
Understood.
Thank you, Carlos, for joining the introductions.
Very good. All right, thanks everybody, and thanks for doing the intro. It's fun to hear from our new members as well as those that have been on the committee for a little while. So our first agenda item is approval of minutes from the December 11th meeting. While I think anybody is welcome to comment, I imagine we'll want to limit this vote to folks that were there in December. So any comments on the draft minutes that you can find in the meeting packet from December 11th?
No
Okay.
one else does. I'd be happy to make a motion.
Yeah, please do.
I can second that motion.
And okay, a motion to approve the minutes.
Thank you. And I heard a second, I think, from Eric.
From me, John.
Oh, sorry, from John. Roberta, will you please call the roll?
David?
Yes.
I will call everybody, but as you mentioned, the members who were not present, you can abstain. Michael?
I will abstain.
Heather?
Yes.
Joe?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
Mary Jo?
Abstain.
Eric?
Yes.
And Ryan?
Yes.
All right. Motion
right.
passes.
Great. Thank you very much. Okay. On now to the good stuff. So we have two main conversation topics tonight. The first are a pair of grant applications that are left from our December meeting. For those that were not there, our December 11th meeting was really kind of the big voting night of the year, where we reviewed the applications that came in the general round over the late summer and extending into the fall, made allocation decisions on a number of the projects, and we had two that that remain kind of on our docket here, and we wanted to continue deliberation on those tonight. After we get through this segment, we'll talk a little bit about reviewing our fiscal year 2025 process and looking forward to the 26 funding round, and Roberta will talk through some of the key milestones along that path and any adjustments or feedback that we want to offer for that. So starting on the continued deliberation, the first one here, and we can go straight into it, especially since we have a guest here to speak to it, I would imagine, is the Quincy Street open space renovation that was submitted by our friends at PSEF. So Roberta, I don't know if any further preamble you want to give regarding this project.
Yeah. So the reason this vote was held over from the previous time was because committee members asked for more information about the budget, to ask how the budget was derived, and to ask for clarification about the fact that there is not a water fountain proposed for this, and to make sure that the budget had was accounting for there not being a water fountain, which had appeared in a previous version of the budget. So that information was provided to us. It was in your meeting packets. And maybe we can give Estelle a moment. Did you want to give us an explanation of the material that was submitted?
Sure, I'm happy to. Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Estelle Organet, and I am a senior public space planner and landscape architect with the City of Somerville's Public Space and Urban Forestry Division. To introduce myself a bit, I moved to Somerville 9 years ago with a year-long stint in Cambridge before moving back to Spring Hill, and I'm here to provide some sort of updates regarding the request for CPA funding for $500,000 for the Quincy Street Pocket Park. And so initially, the request did include water connection, but that is not the case. We are requesting $500,000, as you've all seen, to incorporate or to include costs for construction bid documents. So that's to produce the drawings themselves. And so that will require, from what we're looking at, engineers to stamp and approve the sites for the renovation, as well as the building and construction costs. So that includes the hardscapes, demolition, site preparation, materials, all of that, as well as the planting. And so all of the planting will also, all of the ground cover planting will be replaced. So we'll keep the trees, but the ground cover planting, which isn't doing very well in general, will be replaced. And that is also a reason for the costs.
Great, thanks, Estelle. And for folks who are new, we did receive a full presentation about the scope that is proposed here. The Quincy Street open space is, correct me if I'm wrong, Estelle and John, on Quincy Street between Somerville Avenue and Summer Street,
Correct.
close to Union Square, close to the Market Basket on Somerville Ave, and is a roughly a one parcel wide, a townhome parcel wide pocket park along Quincy Street. Anybody have questions for Estelle on the scope here?
Michael?
Thanks. I don't know what the procedure is here over at the planning board. We're pretty tight about folks just jumping in. So I had a pretty simple question, and this could either be for Estelle or another member of the committee. I noticed that there was a requirement to have the funds drawn within 3 years, and I was wondering if there is some precedence around that number, or if there was some kind of rationale behind that requirement.
I can maybe take a gander at explaining where the requirement came from. In the last couple of years, the committee has taken a long look back at some projects that took a very long time to come to completion. And so, well, most, if not all of those projects have finally been unstuck. Whatever it was that caused them to get held up. The committee began adding a requirement moving forward that the projects, city projects, because if they're projects that are managed by a private entity, there's a grant agreement that's a contract with the city that has to be the contracts cannot last more than 3 years. So it has to end in 3 years or be approved to be continued by city council to go beyond 3 years. But city projects had no natural limit. And so the CPC wanted to create parity by requiring that the city come and request an extension from the CPC for projects that are going beyond 3 years. And so that's not to say that the CPC won't grant the extension, but they just want to have the opportunity to check back in after that length of time to make sure that there's a plan for the project to move forward.
And I think it's initiation in 3 years, I think, right? It's not completion in 3 years.
Yes, initiation within 3 years.
Because that was, kind of one of the things we were seeing is projects getting it funded and then sitting
right
for years.
And given that this proposal is for a design process first, right? I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, Estelle, I don't think any issue initiating the design process within the next 3 years.
Correct. Pretty much as soon as we have this, we're ready to submit scope of services and all of that and get that going as early as this spring.
Understood. Thank you. I did want to just say, because I was kind of the driving force behind the discussion about not understanding the budget previously. I see what was added in there. Thank you very much. Much clearer now. I'll note there is a very minor discrepancy between the full application and the breakdown, the more detailed budget that was sent, $5,000 allocated to one budget versus another. I'm not particularly bothered by that. But did want to note it between the construction and the contingency numbers.
Just to provide some clarification, when we were doing the math on that, we noticed that the maximum contingency allowed was 10%, and of that construction budget, we were only reaching $450,000. So we were like going over that. So we thought of shifting just so that we were staying under that 10% limit.
Understood. Thanks, John. Yeah, I'm not bothered by that. Anybody else on the committee is welcome to weigh in on that, but no issue on my end. Okay. Any other comments or questions?
I have
further discussion.
One question. I'm not a landscape architect, so you could probably tell me anything and I would believe it. But if you're replacing all the plantings, save the trees, what are we doing differently this time so that we'll be back here in 10 years with the same problem?
Yeah, and part of that is making sure that we're incorporating all of the thinking and the research and the learning from the Somerville Pollinator Action Plan. So making sure that the plants are pollinator friendly, that they will last longer, and that they are also going to be what the city wants in terms of planting throughout. And so just the planting pallets, making sure that they're low maintenance, etc.
Okay. Sounds good. Thank you.
Okay. Before I ask for any motions that folks want to make on this, I intended to ask you, Roberta, before we went into the projects, and I just forgot. Would you mind pulling up the summary of the budget available, just so we can put into context for folks how this fits into the annual picture?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for the reminder. I'm pulling up the share screen. Okay, so you should be able to see the spreadsheet that shows the summary. We have so far the projects committed at last month's meeting amount to $2.6 million. That includes the affordable housing allocation and a set of open space recreation historic preservation projects that utilize most of all of the historic preservation funds that are available and most of the budgeted reserve that's available, and taps a little bit into the undesignated fund balance. This project is slated to come from the open space and recreation reserve, so there remains the $500,000 that would cover this project in the open space reserve. So the balance, if both of the projects that are under your consideration for this evening are recommended for funding, that would leave 44,000 remaining in the budgeted reserve and 947,000 remaining in the undesignated fund balance. For those who are new to the committee, you may have had the chance to review previous meetings or the fall report that was provided in November that explains that the undesignated fund balance is a combination of funds that are carried over from prior years that have not been appropriated, so they are they're available to be used for any of the 3 program areas. And it's also the place that new revenue is put into that has not been appropriated yet. So we see new revenue from last year that amounts to $617,000. We cannot use that new revenue from last year until it is certified. So until next year, we have to keep that 617,000 not touched. So last year, the committee elected that they would really like to maintain a minimum of $750,000 in the undesignated fund balance that allows for cash flow, as we see here, the need to maintain the unappropriated revenue from 24 cash flow, as well as any emergency reserve in case something unexpected happens. So the minimum that the committee wants to carry over year to year is $750,000. That leaves $197,000 of potentially available for off-cycle funding remaining in the undesignated fund balance. So that's where we are right now.
Thank you very much for the summary. And when we talk about the potentially available for off-cycle applications. We're talking about any apps that come in the door in between now and the end of the fiscal year, which I believe is June 30th. Correct me if I'm wrong,
Correct.
Roberta. So not a massive amount of time, but still we have had things come in at the last moment. So anyways, thank you for sharing that. Just wanted to add a little perspective as we weigh this request for $500,000 from the open space and recreation pot. So I'll turn back to the committee. Any further questions, comments? If not, I'm happy to invite a motion if anybody wants to make one as well.
I would actually like to make offer a comment on let me share the draft recommendation. I didn't catch this until I just now was looking at the file that I included in your meeting packet, but the condition that Michael asked about earlier, the project must be initiated within 3 years. This is actually something at our previous meeting, we talked about moving some of the repeated funding conditions into general conditions in the memoranda of agreements and grant agreements that the grantees sign for CPA when they receive a CPA funding grant. And so this is one of the conditions that we apply to every CPA grant with the city. So this is one of the conditions that I'm actually in favor of moving to the general conditions rather than including as a special condition in the recommendations.
Understood. So your assumption here would be then, unless someone mentioned something, we would not have any special funding conditions on this recommendation in particular.
Correct.
Understood.
I have a question about that, because when you were just explaining the basis for this in the first place, I thought it was because of the difference in the funding mechanism between the grants that go to private entities and our agreements with the city.
Right. So we have, when the grants go to private entities, they sign a grant agreement, and there's a set of general conditions that go with grant agreements. And projects with city departments sign a memorandum of understanding, and there's a different set of general conditions that applies for city department recipients versus private recipients.
And there wasn't in the previous version of the memorandum of understanding any condition that they start a project within a certain time frame?
There didn't used to be.
And there is now, or you're proposing to put it in now?
There is now. I'm proposing, actually, I think I've set up one grant agreement so far that applies the new set of special condition, the new set of conditions that reflects this change. I did share the draft, or what I shared with you in December, I believe, the old general conditions for both grant agreements and memoranda of understanding. I have not yet shared with you what the new general conditions look like. So that's something I can share just for your information in your meeting packet next month.
Yeah, my concern, and I remember we discussed this to some extent in December, is the transparency of it being in that document as opposed to in this document, and whether it's upfront enough, or whether it's in a document that people actually see versus, kind of page 17 of some document that no one ever gets to.
Mm-hmm. So the general public isn't going to see it for sure, but another change that I've required let me see if I can quickly pull up the new version.
Right, I think we talked about it, adding a signature to both.
Yeah, so I've added a signature to I've combined the general conditions and special project conditions into one form and added a signature line on that form so that the person who is carrying out the project, in this case, that would be Estello, would have to sign the conditions and thus hopefully be aware of those conditions when they sign the memorandum of agreement.
And for the benefit of folks who are joining for the first time tonight, general conditions that we would attach would be, Roberta, correct me, signage saying that CPC contributed, a promise to return any unspent CPC funds for use in future distributions by us. Any other key ones? This 3-year time frame that we spoke about. That's like that's the general flavor of what we're talking about, right?
Yes. And in addition to that, it also has requirements of reporting to me, of providing me with updates on the progress of the project, and some other legal requirements.
Yeah. So hopefully nothing controversial or surprising there, but I think it makes sense the way you've described, Roberta, and yeah, this is our opportunity as a committee now. If there's anything special we want to attach to a possible recommendation, now is the time to bring those up.
So is the language that you've added to the general conditions the same as what you're proposing we take out of this cover letter?
Yes.
This granting letter, whatever it is.
Yes.
Okay. As long as, yeah, I mean, my goal is just that we have a legal foot to stand on.
Yeah.
Were we to want to say, hey, you agreed to these terms.
Understood. Okay. All right. Any further comment here or further questions? Was that Heather maybe?
Yes, Ryan. This is Heather. I'm just getting my video off because my service is poor. But I also just wanted to mention for the new members, because I think it helps when you're thinking about conditions and stuff, is that individuals who get the grant, they have to submit sort of payment applications with backup in order to be reimbursed. So they don't get all of the money and it doesn't sit in their bank account somewhere, although that may be different with the city, but nonprofits and other organizations that get a grant, they get it incrementally as they spend it down with backup.
It's true.
Thanks, Heather. All right, if no other questions, comments, or conditions that folks are wanting to attach here, I would welcome a motion if anyone would like to make one for this.
I'd be happy to make a motion to approve the grant for 500.
I'll second that.
Thank you, Eric. Okay, Roberta, can you read the roll, please?
Yes. Eric.
Yes.
David.
Yes.
Michael.
Aye.
Mary Jo.
Yes.
John.
Yes.
Joe.
Yes.
Ryan.
Yes.
And Heather.
Yes.
I heard a yes. All right. The motion passes unanimously. The committee recommends the funding for the Quincy Street Park. Thank you, Estelle, for joining us this evening.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Thanks, Estelle. Thanks, John. Okay, very good. All right, on to the next project and the final project from the original round. This is 50 Bow Street, the brickwork proposal. So I guess, Roberta, I can give a 5-sentence overview of what this is and why this is still on our docket, and then you can you or anybody else on the committee can fill in any blanks for new folks. So this is the beautiful red brick building on Bow Street in Union Square. That is a condo building. It's owned, it is, I believe, 10 condos if memory serves. And this application has come from the condo association, from the HOA. requesting funds to restore some of the exterior brickwork on this historic structure. Roberta, it was originally a police station or fire station? I can't remember off the top of my head.
Police station.
Police station. Okay, very good. And part of the reason that, in my view, that this rolled to this point and was not voted on last time was the peculiarities and the special conditions, if you want, of making an award to a condo association that is one entity, but is actually a series of entities under it. So that, I think, is the number one topic for discussion, is how we handle allocations, if we choose to make one for this project, to condo associations, and what conditions we would include in a potential approval or recommendation. The second piece that we had discussed on this was more generally about the allocation of CPC funds for historic preservation uses to private entities. That obviously on its own is an allowed use, and we have precedents before of this committee giving funds for historic preservation work to private entities. So that in and of itself is not a problem, but we had talked about how we verify, or if we need to verify, historical significance, particularly when a proposal is coming to us from a private landowner or property owner. So I'll stop there. Those are the two issues that are on my mind to discuss, but Roberta or Eric, anything you want to add?
Thank you. That's a good summary. I did include in the meeting packet a memorandum that I drafted to very simply convey some of the input that I received when I looked into the complexity of making a grant to a private condo association. The greatest concern is that the assumption is that part of the public benefit of a grant for historic preservation is obtaining a preservation restriction on the property for which the grant is offered. And it has been my experience that a preservation restriction requires not only the owner of the property to execute the preservation restriction, but they need to submit assent forms from any mortgage holders on the property. And we have had some projects that were awarded CPA grants in the past, which were required to have preservation restrictions as a condition of the grant, and the preservation restrictions were never recorded for various reasons. Namely, because either the property owner has not cooperated with executing the preservation restriction, or their mortgage holders did not agree to sign assent forms that would enable us to prepare a preservation restriction in perpetuity. And I have concerns about whether a condo association would be successful in getting all of the members of the condo association to execute the preservation restriction and to submit the assent forms from all of their mortgage holders that would be required to get over the finish line to be able to record a preservation restriction in perpetuity. It is an easier ask to have a term limited preservation restriction because those assent forms are not a required component of a preservation restriction that's term limited, say for 30 years. But given that this is already a property that's in a local historic district, a term limited preservation restriction doesn't give quite the level of community benefit that a preservation restriction in perpetuity would. So I have sought counsel from the Community Preservation Coalition and the Somerville's Law Department about what are conditions that the committee might consider putting on this project that would offer a commensurate public benefit to the project. And so the law department offered the suggestion of funding conditions, which I have included in the draft recommendation for this project. The funding conditions being to execute a preservation restriction that's term limited for 30 years, which we could do on our own timeline, get that recorded before funds are distributed. Then a covenant that requires the grant be repaid unless a permanent preservation restriction is put in place within the span of 10 years. Realistically, in this case, I'm not sure that they're ever going to succeed, but we can give them the option to try to get this to meet this condition. And the only other thing that I would add is that, as was done the last time, the committee awarded or recommended the award of a large grant to a private property owner. We required that the property owner sign a memorandum of understanding that they agree to the conditions that the CPC attached to the recommendation before we send it to City Council. And so we would want to do that in this case again too. So if the CPC votes to recommend this project this evening, then we would ask that the grantee agree to those conditions, sign a statement agreeing to those conditions before we submit that recommendation to City Council.
Thanks, Roberta. So I just have a clarifying question. I want to make sure that I understand what could happen if we make this award with the conditions that you just described. I see 3 potential ways that it plays out. One is that the condo owners are unable to record a 30-year preservation restriction because that would require the consent of all of the condo owners, right? Not talking about their lenders to do this, but it does require all 10 of the condo owners. Is that right?
I am not 100% sure about that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But whoever has the authority to sign,
all right,
could sign it.
Understood. Okay. So there's a scenario in which they don't get permission, they can't agree, and they do not record a preservation restriction for 30 years, in which case we never make a disbursement, right? The money comes back to us for next year. So that's scenario 1. Scenario 2, they agree to record a preservation restriction for 30 years. We give them the money, they spend it, but they fail to record a permanent preservation restriction within 10 years. That's the scenario that does require their lenders, everybody's lenders, to agree, right? In that case, we're effectively giving them a 10-year interest-free loan, right? Because they would owe us the money back at 10 years. Even though they spent it, they would have to pay us back after 10 years. So not the worst outcome. There's still value in that for the community, a 10-year interest-free loan, but that's not typical of what we do, right? So that's the second scenario. The third and all-in scenario is they execute a preservation restriction for 30 years, we give them the money, and then they figure out a way to do a permanent preservation restriction within the next 10 years, and then it functions like any of our other grants. We allocated it, they spent it, they do the work, great job, we're all happy, right? So, okay, so those are the 3 ways that it could go if we make a recommendation. I'll stop talking and see if anybody else has comments.
Yeah, I have a question. First, Ryan, thank you for that analysis. I'm actually more, I guess my question is, what's the difference between whether there's a 30-year preservation restriction or a permanent preservation restriction and the preservation, protection on the building right now, as is? Like, what are we getting? What are we getting for this agreement? Yeah, we don't already have.
That's a great question. The way that the city intends to manage the preservation restrictions that we have now on buildings that received CPA funds is that any project that is proposed on those buildings would have to come to the Historic Preservation Commission as if applying the same criteria that are currently on the LHD. So it just becomes a second layer of criteria that triggers the need for historic review, following the same criteria of historic review that there currently is. The only difference is that the LHD could theoretically be removed by an act of the city council, whereas the preservation restriction is attached to the deed and would either expire in 30 years or never expire.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say too, is that technically tomorrow, the city council could decide to eliminate the protection of the building and it wouldn't be there. Not likely, but who knows?
So Eric, in your position as the Historic Commission person, is this additional level of protection warrant, in my mind, a lot of kind of a lot of extra work and a lot of protocol bending in order to try and make this award?
It's less likely an issue with a building like this than one that's more on the edge someplace. It's not. I mean, would we ever give money to a building that's not in a historic district already? We haven't had that come up yet. I don't think, at least not in my time here.
But to me, that would be a more interesting conversation, because then we're getting protection on a building we don't otherwise have any protection for. If I understand.
Yeah, it's also kind of a thing of maybe of just consistency in a way, like what the rules we apply evenly across all the buildings. Obviously, this one's being treated a little bit differently than the Adams Lagoon House because of the multiple ownership. On that one, we had a pretty extensive clawback if they sold it within X amount of years, that the money would come back. I think that was an attempt to prevent someone from pocketing the money and then selling it the next year and getting a profit from it. I don't think we're even trying that on this one, because that would be, I don't know how we pull that off.
I just want to comment that the Adams Lagoon House was it never proceeded to city council because the property owner didn't agree to the conditions in advance before sending it to city council, and that was a sticking point. And that's something that I'd like to bring back to the committee later this year, when we're not in the middle of this funding round, to talk about how to proceed with that. So that is a precedent that you set in the past, and I'm not sure whether the committee will decide to stay with that precedent or to evolve in how these projects are treated. I do have to say that I'm more confident with the funding conditions that we worked out with the law department, as shown in this version, than the funding conditions that were applied for the Adams Lagoon House.
Thank you. I think I sort of digressed on David there, but it's hypothetically, it could matter. It's not so likely with a building like this, given its prominence on the Bow Street Historic District, and it's kind of like the focal point. Mm-hmm. At least in the current mindset, I would be hard put to see the city council just deciding to undo it. But who knows, in 20 years, maybe someone decides to get rid of this historic district and upzone it massively or something. I have no idea.
Want to put a 25-story building in.
Yeah, right. So it just gives us a little bit more permanency to it, but at this point,
And that,
yeah.
and I made the comment flippantly, but actually I guess it's a genuine, I mean, that's something that's happening around Somerville. And so I guess that would be the question. So were someone to come in and say, we want to completely remake that street and make it, the whole lot of, big structures. And we think the benefit outweighs, the loss in this, couple of historic buildings. What protection would it have now? And what would what we're talking about, would that stymie that, or could that be unraveled just as easily as any other protection?
Actually, with an easement, isn't that also, if the easement holder agrees to it, couldn't that be eliminated? There might be tax implications where if the, I know this was conservation easements where if the hypothetically owners of Bow Street would get a tax if they could do before and after appraisal and show that they donated value in their property, they could somehow get tax breaks from that. But they have to repay that.
Both parties need to agree on it to be terminated.
I'm sorry, I lost the first part of that, John.
I believe with easement agreements, both parties need to agree to remove it. So I don't know if it would be the city or the CPA that would have to agree also to remove the easement.
Okay.
So that, I guess, adds like one little like barrier to them just wiping it away.
Could I ask a question that is not about this restriction where we're discussing, but stepping back a little bit, forgive me, being new. I've been struggling philosophically with this particular project. And it's one of my favorite buildings. It's obviously very special, but and it's actually 14 units because I took the time to kind of look at how many units, when did they buy, who bought what are the prices now, sizes, blah, 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 just to get myself up to speed. And as an armchair observer, it felt like deferred maintenance kind of built up on them, maybe. And now we have this funding mechanism and a market rate condo association is turning to it to solve some deferred maintenance. Now, maybe I'm being really simplistic and I'm missing some things that you guys, were able to become more knowledgeable about in the last discussions and so on, but I'm just really struggling with this one. I also am worried about precedent. Other condo associations in historic buildings, knowing that we might fund this, could maybe not be as careful in maintaining their historic buildings on the exterior because maybe this type of funding could pick up the slack. And once again, I apologize if what I'm bringing up you all had already discussed.
No, thank you very much for that comment. And no need to apologize either.
No, and I was kind of leaning in the same direction. Frankly, I'm also a little uncomfortable with this. I mean, Adams Morgan, and I know it's a little bit, it's a sharp edge of a slippery slope. I think with Adams Morgan, our concern was that there was this really old house with a single owner that didn't have the wherewithal, that didn't have the money to do the work that she genuinely wanted to do, and we wanted to kind of help her do. And even then, with all the various clawbacks, and guarantees that, that she, not somehow, then flip the project and benefit. It didn't exceed. This one doesn't feel at all like that. This one feels like, a lot of luxury condo units in a building that just happens to be an historic building, and they're coming to us for money to do their maintenance.
One added thought, if it's possible to chime in twice. I think of people when they purchase a condo unit in a building like this, I assume that they feel like stewards. Certainly if you buy a historic home, you're like a steward. And going into it that the maintenance of the exterior could be pricey. So that too was kind of coloring my thinking, which is this building was always had the masonry exterior. Repointing of the brick was always going to be a big expense. It was not a surprise. And that also was on my mind.
That's fair. Thanks, Mary Jo, for that comment. Yeah, I mean, I think for me personally, the Adams Magoon House, and as I've learned about it, it is an interesting precedent. I think when I kind of run through my tests of eligibility for our funding, I think about, is this something where there will be is there a promise of a public benefit? I think the answer here is yes. But I think what you're hitting on is there a need? Are there alternative sources that could be used to also achieve that public benefit? And if we have scarce dollars, are they better allocated elsewhere? So I think this debate is totally fine for that. I think stepping back to, okay, if we're considering historic preservation proposals on private parcels, I don't particularly think we will be looking. I don't think it's our right as the CPC to be looking at people's tax returns or look at their need, quote unquote need. I don't know if that's the intent of CPC. I totally understand where this conversation is coming from, but just playing it maybe devil's advocate for other projects. I don't know if it's appropriate for us to be looking at home values or assumed income or assumed rent or whatever it may be. I don't know, Roberta, if you have any perspective on that or conversations that have taken place in the past with CPC regarding need in that way.
That's a really good question. So historic preservation as a category is not need dependent. The public interest is preservation of a historic building in this case. And so yeah, you are correct that income is not necessarily a part of that calculation. But on the other hand, you might consider that the public interest is determined in part by the risk that the building is under, and a person's income might be considered by committee members as part of the perceived risk of the property being deteriorating, the condition of the property deteriorating due to not having the ability to make the necessary improvements.
Roberta, remind me, do we have someone from this organization come to us to present?
We did. There was a member of the condo association who spearheaded the application process and gave us a presentation last October.
Okay, I'm just check my notes from that.
And actually, not for nothing, I mean, just to give him I mean, they did, I think, the 3 sides that aren't visible from the street, with their own dollars, and then said, but this 4th one, which you can see from the street, we're thinking maybe, we could get public funding for. That was kind of their logic.
Thanks.
So this is Heather. I personally, I support giving preservation funds to residential projects, whether it's a private residential or condo association. We certainly support organizations and nonprofit organizations that are in historic buildings. And I think that the historic residential landscape of Somerville is really important to preserve, and this old municipal building. And I thought that they did show good faith in terms of that they had done a number of capital improvement projects and had a number of special assessments to do other facades of the building. And they were asking for money for this more public facade. And I guess I just want to put a pitch in there that I think it's okay to support preservation projects that are not going to nonprofits in large old church buildings.
Thank you, Heather. Yeah, those were the 2 words that were kind of sticking in my mind as well. Good faith. Was this a good faith proposal? And I guess that's up to us to decide, right? That's why we're a committee and not a chat bot that people can apply to. We get to decide whether they've come in good faith or not. So I appreciate that comment.
It's really if we're, as Roberto was saying, if we by default take hardship or financial circumstances off the table, then we're entirely reviewing these projects on the merits of the structure itself and the public good that could be obtained from pitching in. And in a sense, what's the difference then between this or City Hall, where theoretically the city could pay for it? It's like there are lots of, the whole discussion could go in a lot of different directions, and it's kind of interesting. I mean, I guess Roberta's point also about the risk, if we don't pay them, what is the risk that the building will just fall? Like Adams Magoon, obviously it's a wood building, so that thing's going to start rotting a lot faster than the brick's going to fall out of this. But anyway, that's a little digression. I mean, in some ways, I think we also have deferred to the Historic Commission to decide which buildings are worthy of receiving this money. Isn't that also another angle to this? So when
It is. So the last time the committee had considered a grant of this scale for a private homeowner, that was again the Adams Magoon House. The committee requested that the Historic Preservation Commission provide input, some comment as to whether the building was uniquely important to Somerville's history. So in order to be minimally eligible, it has to be determined to be significant to Somerville's history. But the committee was looking for a level higher than just significant. Is this a unique opportunity to preserve Somerville's history? And so in the case of the Adams Magoon House, the project was reviewed again by HPC to make that determination, and then a very lengthy detailed letter was provided to us by HPC staff about the reasons for the historic significance of that building. And in this case, a communication was provided, which is also in your meeting packet, attached to the initial report given to us from HPC's advisory review. And in addition to the advisory review comments that were given to us, the planning staff also provided a statement of the building's unique significance and why this building is of importance to the city. I'm not sure whether they have quite communicated the level of significance that was found in the Adams Magoon House case, but it's, I think, difficult to ask another committee to make a decision that is this committee's decision to make, which is whether the project merits a historic preservation grant.
Thanks, Roberto. All right. Any other comments on this one? I'm not sure whether I feel us going to a vote. It's possible if anybody wants to make a motion. I know we've been talking about this for 30 minutes and we have to move on to some other things. We also could delay a vote on this and further contemplate another time if folks are more comfortable with that. Where do folks stand right now?
Ryan, can I ask one or two clarifying questions briefly?
Please.
So you outlined 3 potential paths, and I want to zoom in on the first 2. The first being the funds being released after that first term limited 30-year restriction is put in place. Is there any way we could reduce our 3-year window to maybe 1 year or something like that? I don't want to tie up the funds for 3 years if we think that this is really a big hill for this group to get over. Is that a possibility that this committee would consider?
I would just like to provide a little bit of context that that the longer term committee members would have experienced, which is that the city's process of putting of signing contracts, signing grant agreements with grantees has been very long. It's a complicated process, and most of the time the grantees are able to get under contract within, say, 6 months of the grant being awarded, but not usually less than 6 months. So it has taken up to a year, I've seen, for a grant to be fully under contract. So I just want to make sure that like we have an understanding of how long the process is likely to take anyway. So we'd be talking about it needing to be completed, or that they should have, the grant agreement would need to be signed as, I mean, the preservation restriction would need to be signed, say within, I'm sorry, just a moment. I don't know if you can hear music, but I'm going to have to step away to let my household member know that they can't play music next to me with headphones on, because I can hear it.
We can't hear it, I don't think.
You can't hear it. Okay. I'll try not to be too distracted. So the, yeah, I want to, I need to think a little bit about how long would be appropriate to give them to have the term limited preservation restriction executed and recorded. Maybe 2 years is a more reasonable timeline to consider rather than 1 year, given that it may take a year just to get under contract.
Sure. And for what it's worth, I think I just mean to communicate a sense of urgency. Like, let's get to that go, no go pretty fast. If it means that, you know, it's reduced to 2 years, that might be great. If it's actually only 1 year after that agreement has been put in place with the city, that's another solution. I don't really know what the right, mechanics are here, but I just wanted to kind of create urgency on that front end. Especially if we are concerned of the applicant's ability to actually get that path.
Does the applicant
second
even know?
Sorry, go ahead, David.
The applicant even know that these are the terms that they might be required to agree to? I mean, are they even amenable to terms like this?
That's a very good question. The terms are included in the eligibility determination form. There's a list of checkboxes included in the eligibility determination form that say, I have reviewed the following documents and I will agree to these terms. I don't have great confidence in all of the applicants' awareness of what they are really checking when they check those boxes. And this is an area where I feel like I maybe need to improve our process to make sure that the applicants really understand the requirements before they go through the whole application process. Certainly, the preservation restriction, I try to emphasize the need for them to agree to a preservation restriction in advance, but it had certainly had not occurred to me to really explore what that would mean in terms of having assent forms from all of the property, all of the condo owners, mortgage holders, and how feasible that was going to be.
Okay. So scenario 2 is we ended up in a 0 interest loan situation. For what it's worth, as one committee member, I like this idea. I think loans are a great enabler. So I actually like finding a way to put this strategy into place more often. But I do want to ask some questions about the teeth behind this. Like, how does it mechanically work such that we get to that 10-year mark, we say, hey, you guys didn't, hit the bogey, we need the money back. And they're like, oh, we don't have anything in our coffers. Sorry. Like, how do we get reimbursed?
Yeah, this is a great question. And it would at that point need to be referred to the legal department to enforce. Right now, it's already a condition in our granted, in the grants that were previously given, and the non-compliant grantees, we technically could go after them and request that they return the funds. But I think that the covenant will give more teeth and a like stronger understanding upfront that this is what will happen if you don't carry out, apply this condition.
Okay.
I think that would be a long, messy, and protracted effort to try and get the money.
Yeah, I again, I really love this idea. I'm a little bit worried about the taxing of our resources, i.e. the legal department. They've got plenty of other things to be doing. You know, that wouldn't send me to a no vote. It just, again, as one committee member, I'm a little bit worried about that detail. But thank you for sharing that information.
Thanks, Michael. All right. Any further dialogue here? I personally feel like there are still questions floating about this one to a point where I'm not sure if we want to take a vote. But how do folks feel about asking for a motion, doing a vote now, or further discussion on a future agenda?
I'm probably not a yes vote yet. So I'd be happy to have someone try and persuade me, or we can just vote and see where the chips fall.
Thanks, David.
Is there additional information that you feel would be useful to have before making a decision?
I think I'd like us to have a little bit more of a coherent strategy about how we would, the precedent we're setting, and what precedent do we want to set, and what are the rules, or what are the guidelines and the boundaries about what we'll fund for our private, entity and whatnot. And I think people have made some good cases for why it should be okay, but I'm just not there yet. And I guess I'd like it to be more of a coherent decision-making process.
Understood. Thanks, David. Anybody who's leaning on the yes side, I'm not asking for a motion, but are folks comfortable making motions tonight, or would you like to delay and discuss this further? That's personally where I'm leaning.
I'm generally more favorable than I am not favorable to this. I think it's a very good point about what, as Michael said, that like, what if they say, oh, sorry, we're out of money in 10 years?
Yeah.
What the consequences are of that. But unfortunately, it's just going to be a very discretionary part of what we do. I think projects like this, and it's be nice to have a really hard and fast set of rules and guidelines, but I just don't know how we codify that in a way that takes some of this angst out of the decision. This is it's a very prominent building. It's an important one. It's not just like some back of the woods kind of thing. So the only information that would help me would be just knowing what framework it is to make sure that this agreement is carried through.
Understood. Thanks, Eric. Okay.
I'm sort of with Eric on the.
Sorry, Heather, we may have lost you.
I was saying that I'm kind of with Eric on the sentiments, and I think one thing we could do, not so much in order to make a decision here, but maybe to inform us going forward, is I know that I think it's the town of Plymouth, their CPC very aggressively is giving preservation funds to private residential owners because they see that private residential fabric as a big part of what makes Plymouth.
Sure.
And I don't know if they have some standard terms that they could share with us that we could start to kind of take a look at in order to, just as a precedence for future discussions.
Understood. Thanks, Heather. Okay, I think unless I hear from somebody else, I'm gonna advise that we hold this over to a future discussion. This is a tricky one. I know this is one of the more interesting ones that we've talked about in my 2 years here, honestly, for folks that are new or have been here. So speak now if anybody wants to make a motion. I welcome it, but I personally would advise that we pick this back up at a future meeting.
And if I can be so bold, it would be great if Roberta or someone can try and figure out what Plymouth or any other towns are doing in this sort of circumstance. I mean, I know with the Conservation Commission, we've got, the MACC, which is like, it's a great resource for, had other towns do it.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's anything comparable for CPCs.
Okay.
Just a reminder that at one point we did have a fund that was going to go to homeowners for small ticket items that we got rid of. But that at one point we're okay with it in theory, just smaller numbers.
Understood.
Right, and again, that was more. Maybe like someone else has pointed out, maybe it doesn't matter that it's 14 individual people instead of an individual person, but it does. But the scale of it seemed very different.
Sure. Okay, well, pending anybody wanting to make a motion now, I think we should move on in the agenda. We've been talking about this one for a while. So I'll pause for a couple seconds, see if anybody wants to add anything. Okay. All right. Thank you all very much for that. It was an interesting discussion, and it's an interesting case study. So we'll pick this one back up. Roberta, nothing needed to formalize that, correct?
Correct. And if I could just actually drop one more thought bubble on this project. One of the things that was suggested in the memorandum that I provided by the legal department is that the CPC review the CPC's evaluation criteria. So I did drop those into the meeting packet as well. Under the FY25 funding round, there's a PDF document called evaluation criteria. So it may be that you'll have a chance to review those evaluation criteria again. And just for some background for the newer members, these are evaluation criteria that the committee worked on together in the past and have been provided as part of our application packets going forward, so that applicants have had a chance to familiarize themselves with these criteria. But the committee tried in the past to formally use the criteria to help with the deliberation process, and found that the criteria were not helpful formally. But it might be helpful just to review these criteria and to think about how they would apply to this project. So.
Yeah, thanks for highlighting that. Sorry, was somebody commenting? No, okay. All right, thanks for that, Roberta. And yeah, that's a great note for folks to review those before the next meeting. Okay, let's go on then to our last agenda item, the annual review, or the start of the annual review for the fiscal year 26 funding round. I would love to hold this to 20-25 minutes if we can, but also have a good discussion about feedback or new ideas for this. So I'll turn it over to you, Roberta, if you want to intro this section.
Great, thank you. I have a couple of documents that I'm going to bring up on the screen. I'm going to share my screen right now. You can see both documents at the same time. So on the right, I'm going to highlight the, oh, I'm sorry, you can't see them yet.
Not yet.
Now, can you see the screen?
Yes, got them
Okay.
both.
Okay, so on the right, you see the 2025 CPC calendar, which is, I try to remember to include this in your meeting packets every month. And this is an overview of what we anticipate for agendas throughout the year. And the agenda calendar actually started in December, just to remember what we did, how we move into what is happening in January. And the CPC, I forgot I was going to also give you an overview that which I didn't include. But there's an annual cycle of the CPA program where in the first 6 months of the year, we're doing this annual review process, evaluating community needs and priorities, and preparing the application materials so that then around the late spring, we release the application materials, invite people to apply for funding, and then receive applications over the summer and begin deliberation on those applications in the fall. So that's an overview of the whole calendar. And every month I try to keep this calendar up to date so that you can look ahead and see what's coming up in the coming months. And I add things that come up throughout the year. And also, just so you know, I might mention that all of the application materials are always posted every month on the CPA website. So if you want to go back and look at what came up in a previous month, you can find those materials on the CPA website. So on the left, I created a similar timeline that breaks down the tasks associated just with the annual review period. And I've coded it so that you can see the things that the CPC will be doing over the annual review period versus myself. In this column, it's CPAM and other city staff who may be involved in those tasks. So the first thing that we're going to be doing now is debriefing on how the last year's process went. And just to look ahead a little bit, we're going to be next month discussing the application procedures and application materials. So I'll prepare some draft application materials to discuss with you next month. And then we have in March our annual public hearing. And we'll be doing some other public engagement activities between now and March so that we can have a number of ways of gathering public input. And then in April, we'll be reviewing all of that public input that we received. And I'll have a draft of the program area context, goals, and priorities sections of the plan update. And then in May, I will have a draft of the budget, which you will approve and to recommend to City Council the annual budget. And then we release the plan based on all of these sections having been completed. So that's an overview of the process. And first, I wanted to pause to ask if there are any questions or comments about particularly what we're going to be discussing and at what point in the calendar, so that I have your input on the content of our review over the next few months.
I had a question, being new and just curious about how applicants, come to apply, or when projects are maybe yet to be even visioned. Do ward counselors, because they know their portions of the city so well, do they ever suggest projects that are in need of occurring? Is that all? Is it city staff? And how might that sometimes cause projects to bubble up?
That's a great question. How do projects bubble up? Definitely through conversations with city staff. And I'm beginning to have some of those conversations now, early in the year, in the hopes that there'll be some real, with having a larger funding available this coming fiscal year. I'm trying to think early about how to creatively bring more city projects to the table. And the non-city projects, come about through reaching out to organizations all around the city who have historic buildings or who are engaged in any of our program areas to invite them to think about what types of projects they might have. And I'm always happy to go and talk with them at any time and to advise anyone at any time about how to bring projects to the CPC, how to set them up so that they'll be ready to apply for funding. And where ward counselors can come in is that I periodically send newsletters with announcements and about the availability of funds and about what the CPC is doing. And the ward counselors, all of the city councilors are included in the newsletter. But I also often will follow up with targeted emails, although I don't think that the city councilors are in my targeted email list. So I cannot always be certain that I've reached them, but the committee members, certainly I think that almost all of the wards are represented on the CPC. It could be helpful for you individually to reach out and make sure that your ward counselors have this information and have an opportunity to either suggest needs that they've seen to provide input or to share the information with other constituents who would have input that would be valuable to the committee. I don't know if music is distracting you. My computer is registering that there's music.
We can hear it, but it's all right.
I'm so sorry.
Any other input for Roberta here on the schedule?
I'm going to pause for 1 second so that I can turn down the music, if I may. Okay, my apologies. We'll see how that goes.
No worries. Thanks, Roberta.
All right. I think are there any more questions about the kind of the annual review process itself on a whole? What I would love to do is to take a little bit of time to debrief and ask if there are comments about how the last application cycle has gone. How has the deliberation process gone for the committee? And do you see some areas for improvement, suggestions for what the committee might want to consider next time?
I can start. I personally feel that the review process has been tight in a good way. I think folks have been focused. We moved through a lot of, I think correct me, 8 proposals came in through the regular round. I think it was something like that, 8 or 9, and had a really good tight meeting where folks presented the proposals to us. We had a great one subsequent to that where we had our first kind of open debate, and then there was the voting in December, which was really productive. We blitzed through. I don't remember for my first year if we got through 6 of the 8 or a comparable percentage at the first time of asking. So I thought those were all really good and productive, and I felt very clear on the purpose of each meeting based upon the schedule that you had laid out, Roberta. So I'll pause there, but that's my reaction.
I'll echo that. I think this is the third round that I've been involved in, and I think this one went really smoothly. I think I liked that we didn't try to bite off too much in any one meeting, and we were, I think, a little bit quicker to push things to another meeting rather than try and power through, which I think we did a couple years ago and had some really marathon tiring meetings. And so I think this way of doing it was to me a little better. I think we also talked about, and I guess one thing is how to try and figure, is not losing sight of the big picture when we talk about the projects over 2 or 3 weeks, so the first 4 not necessarily getting, everything. Then by the time we get to project 7 or 8, we kind of run out of money, so I think that, but I think you did a good job, in those first meetings of us looking at the big picture before kind of, discussing the individual projects. But that I think is the peril of breaking it up is, as we all think, the projects are great until we run out of money, and then we've got 3 more projects.
This is Heather. I agree that I think the sort of the reviewing of the grant process was well paced out, and I think for new people, part of this is our letters of recommendation then goes to city council and then they vote on it. So it's not a real grant until it leaves this committee and goes to city council. So they're trying to do that. I think for a while we were trying to time that to get it to them before they had their last meeting of the year, which has been, sort of a difficult thing, and we've given up on that a little bit. To me, the squishier part of the process is the early deadline, the eligibility and determination forms, which we require not of city projects, but of from the kind of all other applicants. And it's useful because it lets us know who's thinking of putting in an application. It connects them with Roberta and with resources. It sort of starts to kind of bring them along, but it's also pretty early on or something that it's due. So I don't know. And we've tried to put qualifications in there where it's like recommended but not required or whatnot. And to me, that's the one area where I'm not sure if anyone has any recommendations about whether it could be improved or whether it's a necessary step or anything around that part.
I just want to provide some clarification that it's the intent form that the city doesn't need to do, and that we still need to do the eligibility determination form. It's just that first intent form, but I do get it doesn't really give the full picture of all of the projects until we're at the eligibility determination form stage of the process.
And I'm not sure that it actually serves the purpose as well as we'd like, because in fact, this past funding round, we had a city project that had they gone through the intent form process, I might have matched them with a city partner, and only realized at the very end of the process that they should have been working with with another city partner all along. So that could happen again. So maybe the intent form could just be rolled into the eligibility determination form and just consolidate that back into one step, but make sure that that step includes making sure that everybody who should be involved in that project is involved at that stage. And actually, I'm sorry.
Just for timing's sake, if we did combine them, would we want the EDF and intent form to be due in May when the intent form is normally due, or the following month in June when the eligibility determination form is normally due?
I'd say the forms should be due a little bit later, so in June, but maybe I can work harder at trying to make sure that everyone is really communicating with me as early as possible. That was one of the reasons for having the intent form, is to open up those lines of communication really early. Because the earlier I get involved, the more opportunity I have to help steer them in the right direction to be ready to apply.
I
Because
guess one
the
follow-up
new-
question is if the intent forms, they might not be very important for the CPA, but are they very important for you, Roberta, in like organizing and preparing everything? Like, should it stay because it's important for you?
I think part of what's important for me is to be a process that's less confusing to the applicants. So making it into a single form, but then using that to shop it around, I can do, like, it would make sense to submit all of that at the same time.
Because in terms of the calendar, the new materials aren't like, the round doesn't usually happen until March. Right, that we open up the round, so that if things are due in May, that's a very short window. So I would support pushing both of them to June, I think.
Yes, agreed. Another question that came up in discussion, this is really big question. So this is one that we can come back to next month with more time to think about it. But there's just philosophically have had some discussion with staff that the open space and recreation projects have been 90% of those have been city-owned properties, city applying for projects on city-owned property. Maybe one time there might have been a project that was on state-owned property and a non-city applicant. But given that the city PSUF is almost, or maybe is always, the primary leader of open space and recreation projects, maybe we ought to separate the application process and have a different the application requirement for open space and recreation than historic preservation, because they require different sets of information and have different types of applicants. So maybe it would make sense to split them permanently and to just require that even if it ever happened again that it was a non-city applicant on non-city property, that they should partner with PSUF for an open space and recreation application. I just want to throw that out there and see your response, so that could instruct me in preparing some draft materials for next month.
Just to follow up on that, I know, Roberto, you and I talked about like maybe it's something like it's just one application that shows like all of the projects that PSUF is planning to do over the next year or 2 years that relate to design and construction, and kind of giving like an overarching review of that. It's definitely in its infancy right now. There's like a lot of ideas and conversations, but it is just like one idea.
So to be clear, I understand this. So it's a really more idea of the city submitting a single consolidated application for all the different city projects?
Just for the open space and recreation
that's what I meant.
projects, yeah.
For those things.
Because you'll
But
see
then
like
would we give
in
them-
a lot of
give
the
them that-
application.
And then we'd either give the whole thing a thumbs up or thumbs down, or we would then consider them and vote on them. Like, I'm trying to figure out how it would work after it gets to us.
That's a good question. I think it would need to be severable. So I think it would need to be set up in a way that the CPC can vote on the individual components of that consolidated application.
Right, I mean, because to the extent that it streamlines a lot of the, just the kind of the bureaucratic end of the application thing, that I don't have any problem with, but I do think it should be like a cover, a single, whatever the background stuff is, over then, the separate, proposals that, I mean, so I understand the streamlining thing, but I still think I don't want to then overly complicate the unwinding of it when we're reviewing and discussing it.
So just so I could fully understand what you're proposing, Roberta, are you suggesting that if a private individual were to bring an open space project, that they would have to work with the city to get it into this mix?
That is that's a really good question. So I'm trying to think of some different ways that this could work, and it might be that a private individual could still use the same application that historic preservation projects do and enter the stream that way, so that only PSUF is submitting the consolidated application form. But that's likely that okay, so it may have, there's a remote chance that it could happen. And we don't want to block those from ever happening, but it's a very small chance because most of the open space projects in one way or another are going to involve PSUF.
That yeah, I understand that. I definitely wouldn't want PSEP to be a gatekeeper, though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Of
Right.
people coming to us.
Yeah, that's exactly right. If we're worried that we're not getting applications from a particular pool of folks, the last thing I want to do is make it harder for them. I want the opposite. Let's make it easier somehow. So
Yeah. But the reason why it's unlikely to have non-city applicants for open space and recreation is because, similar to the historic preservation, it's going to require there to be a permanent deed restriction put in place, preserving it as open space. And if appropriate, it would need to also have a use easement in place to ensure that there's some public access. And that's a very high bar that is going to be very rare that an applicant wants to meet that requirement.
Although turning that around kind of on its head, so to speak, something the city could encourage of private owners, big developers, is that if they set a significant parcel of their land open for public space, that they would, that there would be some benefit to them, that, the city would, do something that they, that is to their benefit. And then in exchange, the city's getting this open space it might not otherwise get.
Well, the city is pursuing, privately owned public spaces with the newer developments and some of the overlay districts, right?
I'm not
So
sure how.
that was one, like, that's kind of where I see the CPA open space funds going. If they go anywhere, it's to those developer generated like civic spaces. I know previously we talked about our comfortability funding these projects because it's a municipal requirement that they build these civic spaces. So do we want to fund these developers to build a civic space that they're required by law to build for us? I know we didn't really get into the weeds of that conversation, but I do see that as kind of the main other party that's going to try and get CPA funds for open space.
yeah, I think we're venturing down exactly where I was hoping this would go. And it's that there are a lot of, especially bigger developments that require open space. And I would love to find a carrot to expand what developers are currently proposing. Because in some cases, there are these little tiny pocket parks, and maybe these funds could be the difference to get them to get it into a much more, material space for the community. And so I just want to be hopeful that we have space to do this without having another layer of administration for them at this point. But this is great. I'm glad this group has been thinking about this stuff already.
Right. Well, I appreciate your input on this. I'll draft some changes to the application materials for the next meeting, envisioning how we can keep the stream open for non-city applicants for open space, but specifically for PSUF to create a consolidated process that eliminates eliminates even the appearance of competing against historic preservation projects when they're really very different. So there'll be, especially given the application or given the additional funding this year, we may have some opportunities to change precedents and change some of the procedures to streamline things so that the committee will have an easier time absorbing the additional funding. In fact, on those lines, that also might be something that we want to consider. If this was a just enough application deliberation period for the CPC this past year with the level of funding that we had and the number of projects that we had, I do know that there are some communities out there who lump all of their CPC meetings in one part of the year and leave another part of the year with fewer meetings so that they have more time to deliberate when it's the deliberation period. I could see that we could possibly, you know, our spring is tight and the fall is tight. Maybe the summer we might be able to take off 2 or 3 months in the summer, say that July, August, September, or June, July, August meetings. So I wanted to see if you would be interested in trading 2 monthly meetings for 2 additional meetings in the November, December timeline, or November, December, January.
I'm certainly fine with that in principle, although often December is kind of tight anyway with the holidays. So I'm not sure how many meetings we can fit into December.
Mhm.
That's true. And I understand your point that, you know, not every year is going to be like this year in terms of the number and intensity, if you want, of the applications that we got. But given that we all, or at least those who spoke, I think a couple of people agreed that that the process felt good and comfortable and clear this year. I don't particularly feel a need to change it, but open to any other feedback.
Sorry if I'm being too forward as, again, a new member, but as someone who also has another board that has 2 meetings a month, you know, doubling up on this in November and December will make my life less fun. So I bias a little bit towards the spread out schedule, but again, happy to support the rest of this group however they see fit.
But I think you're right, Roberta. We definitely have a high season and a low season, or maybe 2 high seasons and 2 low seasons, which is okay. Even you know, I think we do have 1 month off in the summer already, if memory serves. But you know, we also can keep it tight and concise, maybe on another month in the summer, at least 1 other month in the summer where we have less going on.
Yeah. All right. I got it. So I think we'll work extra hard at keeping things tight during the deliberation period, when it could easily get to be very long.
Yep.
So.
Yep. And in that vein, are there further things we want to jump on here as we approach 8:30? I would love to wrap by 8:30 if we can, but other things, Roberta, where we can offer some feedback?
I think those are the big items that I wanted to ask for your feedback on. So I'll use what I learned tonight to design the application materials to share with you next month.
That you put up side by side. I didn't see them in the meeting package. Were they in there?
Yes, they're in the folder that is CPC planning.
Cool.
And the other thing that is in the folder for CPC planning, I wanted to bring to your attention is the Lunar New Year Festival, which is a community event that's happening this Saturday afternoon, January 25th, 2:30 to 5 p.m. At the Somerville High School in the cafeteria. And so we'll be doing a tabling event. It'll be a little bit more informal than the usual tabling events that we have. Trying to to really engage with the theme of Lunar New Year. We've developed some very simple activities to just have a chance, have an excuse to interact with the public and maybe share a little bit of information about us and encourage people to provide us with input. We'll have the survey for this annual review period ready to launch in time to share for this event. So I would love to invite any committee members who are available this Saturday afternoon to join us. I will have other staff from OSPCD to be at the table with me, but would welcome committee members who want to have a chance to see what happens.
I wish, unfortunately, I'm going to be out of town until just about when this wraps up. I wish I had known. I would have tried to plan around it.
Yeah, it's a fun one. I went with Roberta last year. It's a fun scene. So yeah, Roberta, I assume folks can reach out directly to you if they check their schedule and it's something they can do.
Yeah.
Excellent. Thanks for your work on that.
Yep.
Okay. I think that we had a placeholder on here for all other business, all other open business. I think so. Any last comments or questions from anybody? No, it's been a good discussion. Okay. Hearing none, can I have a motion to adjourn this meeting, please?
Make that motion. Adjourn.
I'll second it.
Thank you very much. Roberta, if you'll read the roll.
Yep. Eric,
Yes.
Mary Jo,
Yes.
David Turin,
Yes.
Michael,
Aye.
John,
Yes.
Ryan,
Yes.
Heather,
Yes.
and Joe.
Yes.
Excellent.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks for your participation and welcome. Great to see the new folks in the room and look forward to next month.
Yep. And thank you, Ryan.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everybody.
Take care, everyone.
All right. Cheers.